يا راغبا في كل علم نافع.
ينمو العلم ويتقدم بتقنياته ومجالاته، ومعه نطور أدواتنا في تقديم العلم الشرعي. أكاديمية
زاد أكاديمية ينبوعها صاف ليروي غلة الظمآن. هذه عقيدتنا الصحيحة فطرة تنفي الشكوك بواضح البرهان. بشرى لنا زاد أكاديمية للعلم كالأزهار في البستان.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. This is the first class in Islamic Creed level 3, where we took before the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with all different aspects, which is the first pillar of Al-Iman. In this course, inshallah ta'ala, we'll continue with the rest of the pillars of Al-Iman, the 6 pillars of Al-Iman, and more that is related to the most important thing in our life, which is to have the proper belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what we ought to believe in with the 6 pillars of Al-Iman. So starting right away, inshallah ta'ala, with the pillar of Al-Iman bil malaika, to believe in the angels. And believing in the angels as the angels are one of the unseen, and knowing the 6 pillars of Al-Iman from the Quran and from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, to believe in Allah and the angels and the books and the messengers and the last day and the qadr, whether it's good or bad. This is the pillars of Al-Iman. So one of which is to believe in the angels. And al-malaika, or the angels, this is the plural, and one is malak. And it comes really, the root of it in the Arabic language, from the meaning of al-risala, or the message. So why? Because the angels, they convey from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would convey to the human beings and other things that they're entrusted with. So this is basically the angels that are the messengers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, we'll talk about specific names of the angels as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informed us in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Also, it comes from the meaning of the power and might, which is also one of the characteristics of the angels. So who are the angels? They're creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created them from light. And this is stated by the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. They are creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are in constant worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They don't disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala command them. They're not females or males as the disbelievers would attribute certain things to them. They don't eat and drink and so on. No one knows the numbers of them except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They come in shapes and forms the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would ought for them to be, as it's mentioned also in some of the hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. They have jobs that they have been entrusted with. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala entrusts them with some of the jobs for them to establish. And again, this is a matter of unseen. So believing in the unseen. And this is the second pillar of Al-Iman, and therefore, if a person disbelieves وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ in the angels, he's a disbeliever because he disbelieves in something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the Prophet ﷺ clearly, and consensus among the ummah that this is a matter of belief, and he is a disbeliever who ever disbelieve in it. And as the Prophet, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, آمَنَ الرَّسُولُ بِمَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ رَبِّهِ وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ كُلٌّ آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ وَمَلَائِكَتِهِ وَكُتُبِهِ وَرُسُلِهِ لَا نُفَرِّقُ بَيْنَ أَحَدٍ مِنْ رُسُلِهِ. The verses. So they believe in Allah and the angels, and many verses in the Quran that talks about this. So when we look into the belief in the angels, we can see that it includes 4 things, if we want to summarize the matter. To believe in their existence, and they are a real thing, is not a metaphoric thing, it's a real thing. And we know that to believe in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informed us when it comes to the names of some of the angels, like Jibreel alayhi salam, the best of all of the angels, and he's the one that is entrusted with the revelation from Allah, and others. And those who we do not know the names of them, we believe in them. And that's why نُؤْمِنُ بِهِمْ إِجْمَالًا وَتَفْصِيلًا. We believe in them in general and in specifics. And all of the angels, the ones that we know and the ones that we do not know. And also we believe in some of their characteristics, as the Prophet ﷺ described Jibreel ﷺ. He saw him in his original form, that he has 600 wings, and he filled the horizon with his wings. This is Angel Jibreel ﷺ. And the angel can come into the shape of a man, as Jibreel ﷺ would come, and he came to the Prophet ﷺ in the form of a man to ask the Prophet ﷺ about al-Islam, al-Iman, and al-Ihsan, and signs of the hour, as the hadith of Jibreel, that we get to know also the pillars of al-Iman. The fourth thing is that to believe in what we get to know from their actions, from the jobs that they have been entrusted with, and of course the ibadah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they are in constant worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all times, as many of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that states this. So some of the actions that the angels are entrusted with, for example, Jibreel alayhi salam, the best of all of the angels, he's the one that is entrusted with the wahy from Allah. He reveals the revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to his messengers and prophets. Mikael, for example, the name is mentioned in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. He is entrusted with the rain and the plants and so on. Israfil is the one that is entrusted with blowing in the trumpet for the end of this life and the beginning of the day of judgment and the resurrection. There is the angel of death, which he's entrusted with taking the souls of the people. Malik, the name of the angel that is the keeper of the fire. The angels, those who would come and blow the soul of the human being in the womb of the mother. The angels, those who are with the person constantly. Each and every one of us, there are 4 angels, 2 during the day and 2 during the night. They record the actions of every single human being. And the angels, those who would ask the dead when they are put in their graves. So these are angels. We get to know some of their names, and we have to be careful of making up names that is not in the Quran or in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And therefore we just keep it the way that the nusus, the text, come with, and always question the authenticity of things, because we have a very clear way of understanding the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. The outcome, the benefit as a result of having the proper belief is to save oneself from disbelief, wal-'iyadhu billah, is for a person to be a believer in the unseen, is to be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking care of the human beings. When every human being, there are 2 angels constantly with him and guarding and protecting and recording the actions, and to have this tranquility that everything is by the protection of Allah. Don't fear anyone but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the most important concern is to rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to be obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that there are more than what we just see. We don't see the angels, and they are existing and they are present, and one of which is مَا يَلْفِظُ مِنْ قَوْلٍ إِلَّا لَدَيْهِ رَقِيبٌ عَتِيدٌ. There's no words is being uttered unless you have 2 angels recording it. So this is a serious matter, and therefore what makes the person steadfast upon the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing that the angels are with us at all times, to have shyness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to have shyness from these angels, and to know that if you don't worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the angels that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best how many there are, we do not even know how many there are. They're in constant worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As the Prophet ﷺ, he said, there is no mawdi' arba' asabi', there's no place of 4 fingers unless there is an angel making sujood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they're in constant worship of Allah. So human beings, with all of their miseries, people think that human beings are all that. What if all of the human beings have become disbelievers? It doesn't decrease anything from the dominion of the heavens and the earth to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If they all become the best and the most righteous and the most obedient to Allah, it doesn't increase anything in the ownership and the dominion of the heavens and the earth, as a hadith Qudsi states this. Why? One of which is already they are creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are in constant worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is something that is in their norm. The human beings are given the choice whether to be grateful to Allah and worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, or whether to be ungrateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why from among the human beings, those who choose to be obedient to Allah, they are the best, of course. And there are so many ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ that talks about the angels, The angels, they're making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the believers at certain situations, and that's why the benefit of it is to get to know that, so that we put ourselves in these positions. If someone goes to the masjid only going for the salah, making wudu, walk into the masjid, sits and prays 2 rak'ah or the sunnah, and he sits and wait for the salah, while waiting for the salah, the angels would make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah forgive that person, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would pardon him, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would bestow His mercy upon him. As long as that person does not break his wudu, as long as he does not cause harm in the masjid. So a great reward from Allah, because the angels, their dua is accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because they are sinless creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And more, of course, there are many great evidences in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, that the more we learn them, the more we increase our iman. But the belief as a pillar of al-iman, to believe in the angels, this is one of the pillars of al-iman that we need to be upon. And we continue inshallah ta'ala with more of these pillars next time. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
يا راغبا في كل علم نافع
ينمو العلم ويتقدم بتقنياته ومجالاته، ومعه نطور أدواتنا في تقديم العلم الشرعي. أكاديمية
زاد أكاديمية ينبوعها صاف ليروي غلة الظمآن. هذه عقيدتنا الصحيحة فطرة تنفي الشكوك بواضح البرهان. بشرى لنا زاد أكاديمية للعلم كالأزهار في البستان.